It's your boy Luke back again for another NFL Showdown preview. This time we have Thursday night football between the New York Giants, also the Washington football team. Kind of a doozy, not necessarily the most exciting matchup, but we have our Draftkings contest. We have a Millie Maker up for grabs. So we're going to dive into all the scenarios we expect to unplay here on Thursday night, as well as our best plays for the single game slate. So we're going to start off by covering our favorite three targets from each team, especially in that spend up tier. Then we're going to move on to our favorite value plays, as well as our picks for the captain slot. So without any more delay, let's hop into the picks for this slate. So we're going to start off our picks here with the New York Giants. Just getting into the over-under here, we have a 40.5 implied total, with the Giants being 3.5 point underdogs. So definitely a little bit of a closer spread, one of the closer on the entire slate. And I think the injury to Ryan Fitzpatrick has a lot to do with that. Obviously, they had a lot of momentum, a lot of optimism with Ryan Fitzpatrick at the head, a little bit more of an aggressive passer, somebody who's going to force the ball downfield. And given the targets that Washington has, they could have really had a good year with Ryan Fitzpatrick at the helm. But now that Taylor Heineke is going to be coming in, somebody who's not as polished, has hardly any experience in the NFL. That's why you see the game total where it is. But for what it's worth, I think it could be even closer to a pick'em than a 3.5 point underdog situation, just because you have a lot of bodies on the Giants that are healthy. You have Saquon Barkley getting back to full health, a solid quarterback in Daniel Jones, and a very underrated receiver core with three pretty solid targets over there in New York. So let's hop into our picks. You're going to see a lot of them are passing based, just because I think the Giants might be playing from behind, for a significant portion of this game. On the other side of the football, you're going to see them try to air it out, run the ball a lot with Antonio Gibson. But as a result, I'm targeting the pass catchers for the Giants. So at number 3, we have Darius Slayton. He cost $6,600, and last week in week 1, he looked great on the first drive of the game. Caught a 45-yard pass, was targeted 3 times, but ended up falling off in the rest of the game. That was the only production that he put up. Had 1 catch, I believe, in the fourth quarter as well. So we can see this week I have him projected for 13.6 fantasy points. That's really solid, especially in that $6,600 range. He's going to be targeted 7 to 8 times. I have him at an average of 5.3 catches, 57.5 receiving yards, and catching a touchdown in just under half of his games this year. So very solid option right there. Somebody who's a deep play threat as well. We saw him catch 3 touchdowns in 2 games last year, so has those pop performances where he really gets it going. So I definitely like targeting guys with that volatility here in a showdown format. At number 2, we have Daniel Jones. I talked about him before. Again, I expect them to be playing from behind for at least a good portion of this game. So as a result, Daniel Jones is going to have quite a bit of volume here for them to stay in it. And again, I expect this to be a close game, closer to a pick'em than a 3.5 point underdog situation. So I expect Daniel Jones to have some success. So at $10,400, I like going there. You can see we have him projected for 36.5 targets, 265 average yards, which is pretty solid. It's what we're used to seeing from Daniel Jones. But the real kicker here is his rushing upside. I have him projected for over 20 rushing yards in this game, close to almost 2 touchdowns, with almost half of that coming by the run. So definitely has that rushing upside you're looking for. Isn't a Kyler Murray, isn't a Lamar Jackson or anything like that. But putting up 4 to 5 rushing points is always nice, especially in a showdown. And at number 1, we have Kenny Golladay. He's my favorite option on this Giants team. And a lot of that has to do with his ownership. A lot of people aren't giving him as much attention as he should. It's also the price tag at $8,200. So you can see I have him projected for 17.9 fantasy points, which is extremely solid. I have him projected for 8.5 targets right now, 6.7 catches, nearly 70 receiving yards, and nearly a touchdown per game. We saw him last year excel in that Detroit offense. They had Matthew Stafford, Kenny Golladay, and that was about it. They didn't have anyone else to divert attention away from Golladay. They didn't have a solid running game, and their O-line was just completely atrocious up there in Detroit. Golladay, now that he has another solid quarterback, I think it's a slight downgrade, obviously. Stafford's a world-class player, but definitely has better options around him. Has a lot more attention being diverted from guys like Sterling Shepard. Heck, even Darius Slayton's going to take a lot more attention than the guys that he had up there in Detroit last year. So I like Kenny Golladay. He has that high potential, high ceiling as well. And in week 1, he didn't have a great game, right? A lot of people aren't going to play him. They think that he's a little bit slow, kind of trying to get used to coming back from the injury and whatnot. But Kenny Golladay, a top 10 receiver in the NFL when he is healthy. So I'm willing to buy in on that potential. And now for the Washington side of things, I think this is the more intriguing side in terms of fantasy production, just because there's such a big unknown surrounding that offense now. Obviously, Fitzpatrick has been the quarterback for all of camp, was expected to be for all of 2021, but things changed last week with his hip injury. Now they have Taylor Heineke at quarterback, and I expect things to look quite different here in week 2. So you can see at number 3, we have Logan Thomas at $7,400. I like him as a safety blanket for somebody like Heineke, especially in his first ever career start. I have him projected for 13 points exactly, 4.5 catches, 6 targets, right around 55.5 yards as well, and he's pretty much catching a touchdown every other game. He's very solid. He has a very high floor. Logan Thomas is pretty much always going to get his keep here with this offense, and especially considering they have a backup quarterback. If you guys know anything about rookie quarterbacks, young quarterbacks in general, they love to rely on their tight ends. A lot of that has to do with familiarity. The tight ends typically across the middle of the field. They're right in the quarterback's line of vision. So they're typically the first check down that a quarterback goes to. They'll check their primary receiver on the outside, that primary long route, and then they'll check down to their tight ends. You tend to see over time they start to rely a little bit less on their tight ends because they get better at reading defenses. They're able to look at their third, even fourth reads rather than just checking down to the safe old tight end. But with Heineke here, I expect a lot of check downs, and that's why Logan Thomas comes in at number 3. He's a solid target week to week anyways, but even more so this week. And number 2, we have Terry McLaurin. He would be at number 1 if I expected them to throw a little bit more, but like I mentioned before, I think Antonio Gibson's going to be the workhorse for this team. I have him projected for 20.5 carries. I wouldn't be surprised if he got 25, even 26 carries in this game. But McLaurin, a deep play threat on every single snap, somebody who's capable of breaking 4 or 5 tackles, taking a 5-yard slant route for a 90-yard touchdown. We've seen it time in and time out. One of the most dangerous runners, period, in the NFL, regardless of just the receiver position. I have him projected for 19 fantasy points, 6.5 catches, 8 to 9 targets, almost 100 yards receiving at 85.5, and he's going to catch a touchdown in almost every single game. So Terry McLaurin, a very solid option. I just don't love the price tag, to be honest with you. He's a little bit boomer bust because he is reliant on that deep play, that big gainer, that kind of thing. But at number 1, we have Antonio Gibson, and a lot of that has to do with just the consistency that I expect from him. With Heineke at the helm, we're going to see a lot of Antonio Gibson. He's $9,600, but that's worth it. Again, I expect almost 25 carries in this game, a bunch of yardage on the ground, nearly 90 yards I have him projected for. And he's also somebody who contributes with the catching. Is able to catch balls out of the backfield, usually gets targeted 3 to 4 times a game. So I like the floor there. I like the upside as well, especially considering that the offense is going to look quite different this time around. And now getting into the value plays, we don't have many options down low this week. A lot of the guys that are injured, we knew were going to be out pretty much on Monday or Tuesday. So Draftkings did a really good job in terms of their pricing. At number 3, we do have Adam Humphries, though, of the Washington football team. He's $4,800 this week, and I expected him to get quite a few targets from Taylor Heineke. Again, we're going to see quite a bit different offense because we've seen the QB switch, and Humphries has actually been the number 1 target of Heineke all camp. Humphries is the number 3 receiver for Washington football team, so at practices when they're running 2 receiver sets, he's been paired up with Heineke the entire preseason. So they obviously have some rapport built there. Humphries is new to the team. So you can see I have him projected for 10.2 fantasy points. Not like I think he's going to absolutely go off or anything like that, but because of that familiarity, he's definitely going to get a few looks in this game. I have him projected for 5.5 targets right now. That has him right at 3.5 catches, 34.5 yards, and 0.3 touchdowns per game. Nothing crazy right there, but in terms of value on this slate, that's excellent. Most of the guys priced around him are 4th, 5th stringers that we don't even expect to see the field. We have kickers priced in that range, defenses as well. And I think Humphries not only gives you a higher floor, but also a higher upside. At number 2, we do have an injury that opened up a little bit of value for us. At number 2, we have Kyle Rudolph. There was an injury to Evan Ingram. He's not expected to suit up this week. So at $3,200, Rudolph does become a slightly good value. I have him projected for just 9.8 fantasy points. So not a really high upside play by any means, but it's definitely going to see some volume in this offense. He'll be the number 1 tight end. I have him projected for 5 targets, 4 catches for just over 30 yards. Again, he's not a deep play threat or anything like that, but definitely could catch a touchdown. I think he catches a touchdown about 0.3% of the time. Sorry, not 0.3% of the time, about 30% of the games, that kind of thing. So Kyle Rudolph, not a high upside play, but at $3,200, he gives you quite a bit of salary relief. And at number 1, though, we have my favorite value play on the slate, somebody I expect to have a huge bounce back week, and that is J.D. McKissick. He's only $2,200, and last week he laid an absolute egg. Only had 1 carry for 8 yards, only scored 0.8 fantasy points. Somebody I had in quite a few of my best ball leagues, so it didn't really hurt me there. Obviously didn't have to start him in best ball. But if anyone that played him in fantasy week 1 absolutely hates this guy, they're not going to go back to him. And a lot of it had to do with the game script. Washington wasn't in a position to throw the ball very often last week. Was playing from behind, was really trying to rely on Antonio Gibson as much as humanly possible. But this week, I expect this situation to be a little bit different. You have Taylor Heineke in there, somebody who's not used to throwing the ball downfield, somebody who's not taking 20, 25-yard passes, game in and game out like Ryan Fitzpatrick. I'm expecting him to check down quite a bit. So J.D. McKissic is going to come in on obvious passing situations, going to be a much better blocker than somebody like Antonio Gibson, also going to be much more productive out of the backfield. So I only have him projected right now for 5.5 rushing attempts for just under 20 yards. That's not what we're looking for. But in terms of catching the ball out of the backfield, I have him projected for 3.5 catches, just over 30 yards, and almost a touchdown in one of every 5 games. So at $2,200, at a 10-point projection exactly, he definitely provides plenty of value on a slate without any at all. And now for our captain slot, you can see at number 3 we have Daniel Jones, and a lot of that has to do with them playing from behind in this game. He's definitely a little bit expensive at $15,600, but at 27.3 projected points, that's really solid. I also only have him projected to be in 14.4% of people's captain slots, so not a chalk option by any means. You would expect him to be a little bit chalkier just because he's a quarterback, especially the most expensive option on the slate. But because he isn't garnering a ton of ownership, I'm willing to go there. Again, he has that rushing upside, and especially for the captain slot, that can make all of the difference. At number 2, we do have Antonio Gibson, though, the absolute workhorse for this Washington team. He is $14,400, which is far from great. That's really expensive for a running back at the captain slot. But I have him projected for more points than Daniel Jones. At 27.7 projection at that slot. He's definitely going to be chalky. He's approaching 20% ownership in the captain slot. But just like Lamar Jackson last week, somebody who's going to be a chalk option at the captain slot, but usually worth it. Usually ends up paying off that salary. Unfortunately, Lamar Jackson didn't do it last week. It's his first time in his career that Lamar Jackson was on a showdown slate and wasn't the optimal captain, which to me is one of the most bonker stats I've ever seen. But Antonio Gibson's pretty much the shoe-in option this week, people that a lot of people are going to go to, and I'll be there as well. But at number 1, a little bit more of a unique option at the captain slot, we have Kenny Golladay. He's only $12,300, so you get a little bit more salary relief for him rather than those first 2 options. And he's still a solid projection at 26.8 fantasy points. The kicker here, only 10.8% expected ownership. So I'll be going to Kenny Golladay quite a bit in my lineups this week. A lot of that has to do with his upside, given Daniel Jones and the Giants will likely be playing from behind. Kenny Golladay is also a great red zone threat. A guy who can go catch 70, 80-yard touchdowns, catch your 10-yard go route, your fade route, that sort of thing as well. So like his upside there, and we saw him have plenty of nuclear games last year. If he goes out and does that again at low ownership at the captain slot, you'll absolutely have to have him. That's all for this week's Showdown picks, guys. Let me know in the comments who your favorite captain play on the slate is. We'd love to hear about it. Perhaps it's one of the guys I mentioned, one of the stud options. Or maybe it's one of the value plays that you think really has a good game. Would love to hear about it in the comments. Go ahead and let us know. And as always, I really appreciate the viewership a ton. Not only does it help me out a ton when you guys watch the video, but if you guys haven't liked and subscribed already, go ahead and make sure you do so. It helps get the content out to more people, spread this information out to pretty much everyone out there playing DFS, so would appreciate it a ton. Later on today, I'm going to have my Draftkings Week 2 DFS picks coming out as well. We're going to be going over my top 6 picks for every position for the 13-game slate on Sunday. So make sure to stay tuned for that. And until then, see you guys, and good luck with any of your lineups this week.